I've seen a lot of people get into squad recently, which is a really wonderful thing, and I'm glad to see the game grow. And lots of the people who are joining are very adept shooter players, but are more interested in how to be proficient at the game. Now, if you are new to the game, or if you're somebody coming back to the game, maybe you're a streamer or YouTuber who's trying to do their best in one of these titles. Who knows? There's lots of people playing right now. And you want to know, well, what is the meta of squad? And how do things work in certain ways? We're going to cover that in this video today. We're going to be talking about the infantry meta, we're going to be talking about the general game meta as a whole, we'll be talking about vehicles, and we'll also be talking about game mode meta. Now, if you're somebody who knows how to aim and shoot, knows how to work in squad, knows how to do the basic things relatively well, then this is right up the street for you. This is the kind of thing that will teach you the nuances of this game that are deciding factors in whether or not you win or lose and have a good time. So let's start with some key settings and the infantry meta of the game. Now, there aren't a lot of settings in Squad that will put you at a disadvantage. Squad actually has things like forced shadows, which means that even people running on low graphics will ultimately suffer the same kind of visual difficulties that everybody else will follow. But there are some things that are really important. For example, the fact that you should always toggle your crouch and prone and lean, because these things will allow you to be more accurate with your weapons. I also recommend toggling your weapon ADS. Toggling crouch, prone, and lean are really important things because it allows you to really use the whole host of maneuverability in this game whilst being in positions that might be beneficial to you. So if you toggle the lean, it means you can use the full WASD control, which is very effective for peeking around corners. The next major two settings are regarding the FOV of the game and the audio of the game. Now, Squad's FOV works in a way that if you use a really high FOV, it puts you at a disadvantage, and I recommend your FOV shouldn't go higher than 95. In Squad, if your FOV is really high, the zoom on your optic, your 4 times, your 8 times, or whatever it happens to be, is actually minimized by you having a larger FOV. So if you've ever wondered why people's field of views are relatively small on this game, well, that's the reason why. Hopefully we'll be able to see some separation between the aim down sight optic and the actual generic field of view in the future, but for the time being, don't change your field of view above 95. Lower is better in this game. Next is audio balancing too. You can actually have your audio balanced in certain ways that you can have your squad audio comms come out of one ear. This sometimes makes the game a little less disorientating, and if you ever find yourself squad leading, you can have both the squad comms and the commander comms, which are 2 separate audio channels in 2 separate ears, and you can also change the volume of these things. I traditionally recommend that you increase your squad audio to about 140% and your local audio to 160%. These callouts are pretty important, and provided you can keep your teammates on relatively minimal comms, which is recommended in this game, people shouldn't really spam information that isn't important unless you're just sort of chilling and having a good time, then ultimately these will be beneficial to you because it means you'll hear critical information, but it won't overwhelm you in battle scenarios. Now let's talk about the infantry meta of this game. This is something that I think a lot of people get confused with when they first spawn in, and I think it's shown by the kind of optics people use. Number 1 priority in Squad, and I say this for all weapons, is simply optics. Squad is a game that thrives on medium to long range engagements, and I highly recommend you have a long range optic on all of your weapons. Whether that's an ACOG sight, a 3.5 or 4 times sight, anything of that general variety is definitely important in this game. Red dot sights do work in some scenarios, especially on close quarter maps with tight corners like Al Bashar or the Fallujah map, but ultimately, unless it has a foregrip, using a red dot sight doesn't make much difference because the recoil values are relatively the same. You'll find some loadouts will have an iron sight or a red dot sight with a foregrip, and that can mean you can have more consistent automatic fire, but ultimately at the end of the day, long range optics are preferable, and most guns in this game, depending on the faction you're in, will have a long range gun option. If you are even a basic rifleman, you can select an iron sight, a red dot sight, or a long range optic in most given classes. This applies to most of the modern militaries. The more unconventional militaries, such as the militia and insurgent factions, tend to be forced into iron sights, but for the most part, you should do your absolute best to have a long range optic. ACOG sight, ZF1 sight, whatever the hell it happens to be, ultimately you need a medium to long range scope to be effective in this game and to seek out targets that may be an issue to you. There is also a process priority of what class you should be using in this game. Squad is a game that requires a really cohesive squad unit to be effective, but more importantly there is a prioritization of what is important. At the very bottom of the scale is the recon class, because as much as recons can be deadly and are good at being spotters, at the end of the day, the fire superiority of something like a machine gunner is much more important, considering this game has a very aggressive suppression system. Also, above that, we have, for example, medics. Medics are massively important in this game, and something you should definitely have at any given instance. You should have 2 medics in your squad, as much as humanly possible. And above that as well, we have anti-tank classes. AT is, in my view, the most important class in the game. There will be some people who slightly disagree with me on this, but ultimately, I find that without effective anti-tank in the game, you're more or less screwed. A heavy AT is the most effective in the field, but there are limitations as to how many people can have this in one given team, and an LAT is equally as effective. And the thing about these classes is even if you aren't blowing up vehicles left, right and center, which is difficult to do unless you have a heavy AT kit, you can at least do some serious damage to them. You can maybe destroy their ammo rack, pop out their engine, take out some of their tracks, and make them much less immobile, or you can make them return to base, which gives you a very large window of time where that vehicle threat is no longer present. So AT is massively important in this game, medics are massively important, and then it starts trickling down to more fire support roles. I personally think the machine gunner is a fantastic role, followed by things like the grenadier, and I would say ultimately at the very bottom end of the scale is the recon. Now there will be some people who will say that recon is a deadly class and you should use it and blah 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 blah. But in my view, there are so many other useful things available. For example, a heavy machine gunner in most scenarios can actually pop the engine of light vehicles just by firing at it because of its higher caliber rounds. That's something that's actually a massive asset. But again, as I reiterate here, at all given costs, just choose a class that will give you a long range optic because that is critically important to any kind of gunfight situation. Becoming a better infantry player and using the infantry meta to your advantage is really down to putting some hours into the training range and just learning the game in general. In squad, infantry tend to move in groups. Infantry in this game aren't sporadic. Once you notice a hotspot, it's a bit like finding an ant's nest, you know? If you find an ant's nest in your house, you know that's where the ant's nest is. You know that's where they're coming from. You found the trail that they're coming from. The same principle applies here in squad. Once you find where the ants are coming from, you know where the nest is. When you see a large number of people come from the east, chances are there's a spawn out in the east that needs taken care of. And the game applies a very simple rule set in that sense. And if you know they're coming from the east, you can flank from the southeast or you can flank from the northeast and make effective plays in those given scenarios. Always be on the lookout to sort of absorb this kind of information. You know, where do you hear gunfire? Where are the vehicles coming from? Where are the infantry firing from? And where can you see perhaps visual elements that might aid your approach? So, for example, if I see smoke in the distance, I know, well, look, that's probably not friendly smoke. It's that far out. I don't see any friendlies nearby. That's where they're coming from. And ultimately in this game, the infantry meta is one of those things where it's about finding the drop on an opponent before they find the drop on you. Squad is a very lethal game, and you can actually get a lot of kill trades in this game if you are, you know, good with a response. But ultimately I find this is a game where it's something about finding the location of enemies, finding that right line of sight, the right angle, the right flank. And if I was to summarize the infantry meta of squad, it would be that this is a movement first game and a shooting game second. And what I mean by that is that it's more important that you get into the right position, the right angle, the right drop on somebody, or the right flanking position, and then fire on somebody, than it is to be accurate and in a bad position. Now, accuracy is also something that's quite important. Unless you have a bipoded, fully automated weapon, you won't be accurate if you're full autoing your gun. You should always single fire, even if you're at medium to close range. Super extreme ranges, you can go full auto or 3-round burst. And actually in squad, the bullets do come out the barrel of your weapon as well. So you can actually have relatively accurate hip fire in squad if you're smart with it. You'll see me hip fire, single fire quite often in this game. And that's just because the hip fire is very consistent and it does come out the barrel of the gun. But ultimately, yeah, that's about it for the infantry meta of this game, I'd say. You know, you need to be the kind of guy who gets into the right places, knows where the enemies are coming from roughly, and makes those moves. That's more important than anything else, I find. Next up, let's talk about the vehicle meta. This is something that's so overwhelmingly complex that in fact I probably wouldn't be able to fit it in a complete, concise video. If you want to learn about vehicles, go to the training range. The training range in this game tells you absolutely everything you need to know about vehicles. It will tell you about the positions of armor, what is weakest, where ammo racks are, and you can really learn how to damage a vehicle extensively with the right kind of tool sets. But ultimately, there is a hierarchy of vehicles. You have main battle tanks, then you have sort of more mobile light tanks, then you sort of have the sort of 30mm / high caliber defensive vehicles and IFVs, and then you sort of have the sort of lower tier MRAP kind of tier where it's like a transport vehicle with a machine gun on top that isn't very well armored. But the thing about the vehicle meta in this game is that it is incredibly complex. Now, in the simplest of terms, most times out of 10, if you shoot something in the arse, you will win. If you see a tank, blow its engine. If you see a light tank, blow its engine. If you see a vehicle, most of the engines tend to be on the front if they're infantry or transport, blow the front engine. And you have to learn these things really intricately. But at the top end of things, I would say that tanks do reign supreme. They soak a lot of damage, and if you're in a tank battle or if you're engaging a tank, your best friend is the ability to track the vehicle. The second a tank becomes immobile, it very quickly becomes vulnerable, because then you can start lining up shots against the engine, and then you can start aiming for critical weak points, which are quite important to destroying a heavy vehicle. There are things such as Warriors and Bradleys, which are sort of hybrids between a tank and an infantry fighting vehicle. They can be more geared towards taking out infantry, but they can also be very lethal because they possess sabot shells or 30mm shells, which can do excessive damage to vehicles as well. But even infantry fighting vehicles like a Bradley or a Warrior can do absolutely nothing against a tank. At the end of the day, if you see a T-72 or you see, any given main battle tank, any kind of vehicle that isn't a main battle tank will likely not be able to do a lot against it unless it has a tow missile. And that's a very limited number of vehicles which come equipped with a Cornet or tow missile. And even the tow missile is typically aimed towards tracking the vehicle, maybe getting behind it and maybe blowing up its engine. Normally when a tank rolls into the field, you wait for it to be tracked, or you try and track it yourself, and then you wait for either another tank or multiple ATs to try and blow it up. They are seriously damage soakers in this game. But yeah, there's a very intricate meta here involved with vehicles. At the very top tier, you've got those MBTs, then you've got the light tanks and infantry fighting vehicles, and then you've got sort of the MRAPs and then the transport vehicles. But there are some scenarios where some weapons just won't do any damage at all. For example, a Bradley or a Warrior, their sabot shells won't do anything to a tank, whereas a 50 caliber gun can actually slightly damage a Bradley or a Warrior, which is a light tank, and a 50 caliber gun can destroy BTRs and also destroy things like strikers, because strikers and BTRs are basically just slightly more heavily armored transport vehicles. Again, these are very intricate metas here. These are things that you will have to learn in the training range. Go and check out their damage models. That is where you will learn the most about these vehicles. But at the end of the day, if it's a transport or an MRAP or something that resembles a Humvee, or looks like a Humvee, like a Tiger on the Russian faction, aim for the front engine, aim for the wheels. Traditionally, you'll find with MRAPs and Strikers that their wheels are very, very strong, but an AT shot will take them out. So ultimately, aim for the rear engine of a Striker and a BTR, and aim for the front engine of a transport, MRAP, or something with a 50 caliber weapon. When it comes to the heavier vehicles, aim for the tracks or aim for the rear engine. That will do the most excessive damage. And that's kind of the basic fundamentals there. You're really looking to track tracked vehicles. If you see a BMP or a Bradley or a Warrior, or you see something with just excessive tracks that looks like it's got some lethality to it, aim for the engine, aim for the tracks, and hope that the rest of your team helps out, because you won't be able to take out one of these things by yourself, unless you're a combat engineer who has a bountiful number of explosives. But I highly recommend you look in the training range, learn how to drive these vehicles, get a feel for them, learn what it's like to have one gun that does have stabilization and another weapon that doesn't have stabilization, because that makes a difference too, and learn how to be cohesive in a unit. I'm also going to leave a link below to a buddy of mine, Moydog. He does lots of really great vehicle stuff, and if you're looking for something more in depth, I would definitely go and check him out. Now finally, let's talk about the meta for modes, and this is something that I guess comes up if you're more a squad leader, but I guess it's useful to know if you're just a generic infantryman. And effectively, the two main modes in this game are Random Advanced and Secure and Advanced and Secure, which are known as RAAS or AAS. There is also Invasion, which is quite popular, and the other modes, like Demolition, they're kind of being redesigned, so they're not really worth talking about at the moment. Now, in Advanced and Secure, your typical meta of this game is to try and rush one of the enemy's early objectives. People normally do this in fast transport vehicles or traditionally do it in helicopters. You go for one of the early ones because in this game, traditionally, a lot of people will send just 1 or 2 people to capture a flag early on, and they'll go for the middle objectives in the central hold of the map. And they'll do that because that's where most of the action will take place. But what you'll find is a lot of cheeky teams will send a helicopter or a transport vehicle over to the second or first flag of the enemy team and try and sit tight and hold them off for as much as humanly possible. If the team is well organized, they'll likely divert their powers and fight back in order to take that point back. And if they do that, then it means that the central point, which is most important, which are the critical 3rd and 4th flags of the game, are more easily up for grabs. But if they are a slow team who's sluggish and not well organized, it will take them a very long time to get back to that early flag that you've rushed, and it means that all of the other objectives will fall to you. In squad, this game is very much important with spawn points. You need to have habs down, you need to have lots of rally points down. You don't have these things, you will get rolled. If your entire team is spawning off of 1 radio or 1 hab, then chances are, 9 times out of 10, the enemy commander is going to put a UAV in the air, find out where that hab is, throw an A-10 on it or a gun run or an artillery strike, and your game will be as good as over. The enemy team will counter-roll you, you'll lose all of your flags, and the game will be done. Whereas typically, a good team will have a large spread of different spawn points and consistent supply runs from logistics coming out of main. Now, the rule set's a little bit different when it comes to random, advanced, and secure, where the flags are randomly positioned around the map. Traditionally, what people like to do in this is try and get a good spread. If you get a good spread of different spawn points across the map, your team will be ready to divert to those flags as and when they appear. Traditionally, your first 2 flags will be relatively close to your main spawn, but then the 3rd and 4th flags will start to get into more open territory and move into lots of larger spaces where things will get a bit difficult. Now, this is something where you just have to be on your toes, you have to move as your squad efficiently, and you might be able to start making reasonable guesses as to where a flag spawns. For example, if it starts moving through the central part of a city like Fallujah, chances are it's going to stay sort of within the central area of Fallujah. It won't really bounce too far wide, and this is something you'll come to learn over time. But ultimately, in a random, advanced, and secure, you need to do your best to get as many different spawn points down as possible, in as many locations as possible to be able to be that quick reaction force, and traditionally, helicopters and fast transport vehicles are your best friend here. And finally, we have Invasion. And Invasion is something that you need to be careful with, because it's a mode that can go right or wrong. I would traditionally say in Invasion game modes, you need to do absolutely your best to gain fire superiority. If you are defending, dig in, build as much as you can. Build defenses, build machine guns, build mortars, build anti-tank, build everything. You'll have so many abilities to lay down supplies and get effective anti-tank and anti-infantry available that you just have to spam them down on the ground and work with your squad leads and get loads of supplies into the points. If you're on the offense, get mortars down, get your tanks in the field, get your vehicles out there, and just try and completely overwhelm the enemy forces. This is a game mode where it's literally just a butting of heads until one of you ends up getting KO'd. It's like 2 guys just headbutting each other repeatedly until one of them decides that they can't take it anymore. It's really difficult to achieve. It's one of those game modes where there isn't a lot of strategy involved. It's traditionally just who gets fire superiority, who lands the rockets, who lands the heavy machine gun shells, and who can gain fire superiority across the central and major parts of the map. It's something that requires a little bit of skill and a little bit of tact from the squad leaders, and getting the right stuff down in the right places, like a good, for example, tow missile that overlooks good parts of the map that can deal with vehicles. Taking those out is quite important. But overarching, if you're just a standard player in these games, dig in. Don't expose yourself. Don't go for risky plays. You know, find a spot where you can kill lots of people and sit tight in your little murder hole, and you'll do great. So folks, that's about it from this video today. This is the meta of Squad in roughly 20 minutes, which is pretty impressive. It's a very intricate game to explain. If you like this video, leave a like. Hope you enjoyed this. There'll be plenty more Squad content to come, and I'll catch you in another video.